Good morning. This is John Chowney with Dialogue on Public Issues with Campbellsville University. In 2019, the voters of Kentucky will once again be electing a new governor as well as other statewide constitutional officers. We're very honored today to have our current governor, the Honorable Matt Bevin, governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, certainly a candidate for re-election. And during this interview, we'll be discussing the issues of the re-election campaign as well as the issues currently that the governor is dealing with in Frankfort. Governor, welcome back.
Great to see you again. Really.
Yes, sir. We appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about how things have been going the past 4 years during your first term as governor.
Unbelievably well. And I say this when you come in and you have a bold agenda. And if you remember, when we spoke in, when I was a candidate, I had what I called a blueprint for a better Kentucky.
Yes, sir.
I was the only one running that would put in writing those things that I thought were important. And they were all considered political non-starters. They were things like right to work and school choice. They were things like addressing the pension crisis and things like cutting red tape. And none of them were considered political winners. In fact, they were often, I was encouraged, maybe you don't want to go there, but they were all things that people knew in Kentucky needed to be addressed. The size of government, the scope of regulation, the tax structure being outdated. All of these were things that deep down people knew needed to be addressed. And the numbers of them that have been accomplished and the numbers that are underway and the ability to move these through this legislature is really a testament to the men and women who are sent to Frankfort to get things done. And I think it's surprising to a lot of folks how effective we've been in the first 3 years and change, but still a lot yet to be done.
To a degree, you just answered my next question, but that question is, why did you decide to run again? There were lots of speculation, obviously, about your future, what you were going to do. Why did you decide to run again for re-election?
It's interesting. I did always tell people, I've never once did I suggest that I wasn't going to run again, but people always, I don't know why they don't believe you when you say you're going to do something, because I've always been, one thing people can say about me politically, anytime I've ever said I was going to do something, I've done it. Yes, it's just the way I was raised, and I'm running again because there's still work to be done. It's a bit for those that many of your listeners probably grew up like I did in viewers in a rural environment. It's like being in the barn in the springtime. You may not like what needs to be done, but there's just a lot of shoveling, especially after a long winter. Stuff piles up. And this is where we are politically in Kentucky to some degree. Now, I don't want to overplay that analogy, but truth be told, there's 96 years worth of bad policies and stagnancy and sort of redundancy that has piled up politically in the barn, and we're shoveling it out. These are the shoveling years. We need to change the trajectory of Kentucky. We're doing it. But it won't happen even in my first and or second term. It will be a 15 to 20 year process to truly change the political culture and the economic trajectory of Kentucky.
During your first 4 years, what do you think are some of the greatest accomplishments that have been done?
Without any question, it depends on what a person's perspective is. From a social standpoint, we've passed some of the greatest pro-life legislation in America, frankly. Certainly in this state's history, but also in America. We are seeing these be challenged as we would have expected, and there's little doubt that some of them will make their way all the way to the Supreme Court. And I'm grateful, I'm honored that Kentucky has taken the lead on this. For me, that's a huge issue. The right to work legislation I mentioned earlier, transformative. I mean, edgy, controversial. People thought the sky would fall. It hasn't fallen. We have more people working than ever in the history of Kentucky. We have lower unemployment than ever in the history of Kentucky. We have the highest workforce participation rate ever in the history of Kentucky. And indeed, our economic development cabinet has seen an increase of 60% year on year since the passage of that legislation in terms of opportunities, people looking to expand. We've had the two biggest years in the history of Kentucky have been the last 2 years in terms of private capital being invested in our state. $9.2 billion and $5.3 billion, the last 2 years, both the largest we've ever had. So that's been cutting the size of government. You see this little button I wear, a little scissors cutting through red tape. I pledged at the outset that we were going to cut as much as 30% of all the regulations. And indeed, we're well on our way to getting this done. All the cabinet secretaries have taken this on with a sense of conviction. And what we've done is we've gotten rid of all of the dross, all the stuff that really had served no purpose. A lot of it was outdated. Those are some things. Modernizing our tax code, still a long ways yet to go, but the legislature making good progress. We've cut our overall tax rate for corporations and for individuals by 17%, which is significant, while also continuing for the first time in history. And this is one that, while it has created, ironically, a sense of, confusion might be the best word. We're the first and only administration that has ever fully funded the pension system. The pension system that has been failing, sadly, for decades, that people know has been failing, and this is the first administration that has ever fully funded it. The final thing I'll say is this, in terms of what we've accomplished. I'm the only governor in the history of Kentucky that has never swept either the lottery fund or the CLEF fund. And lottery fund is supposed to go 100% to education, never has.
Yes.
I'm the only governor for whom 100% of that money's gone into education. I'm also the only governor for whom 100% of the CLEF funds, which is a premium we pay on our insurance policies, that goes to the betterment of law enforcement, firefighters and policemen, and their training and their bonuses. I'm the only governor that's never taken a penny out of that other than for law enforcement. So I think focusing government on what people expected it to do, what people were told it was going to do, cleaning out corruption, cutting the size of things, and focusing on changing the trajectory of Kentucky. The economic future of this state is extraordinary. And I'm excited. That's some of the things that we've gotten done.
Any particular regrets or disappointments during this first 4-year term? Some issue that's still out there that hasn't been solved or only partly solved? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a regret. I wish that it were solved.
Okay.
The pension issue, we haven't fixed the pension issue at all. We really haven't. There have been good efforts made, but it's got to be taken care of, because if it's not resolved, the system will collapse. And if the system collapses, the financial solvency of the state will be ruined, and our credit rating will be ruined. Our ability then to be able to do the things we want to do, would hope to do from an infrastructure, from an economic development standpoint, all these things would be compromised if our state collapses financially. We have the worst funded pension system in America. And the only way to save it for existing retirees and existing workers is to structurally change it for future workers. If we keep promising people of the future the same thing we have promised to people of the past and currently, then we know for a fact it is not true, and that neither they will get it nor those currently thinking they'll get it. So something's got to change there. It's not easy, it's not fun, but that's something. It's not a regret. In fact, I just wish we'd already gotten it done. I'm delighted that we've taken it on, because it has to be addressed.
So in addition to fully funding it, obviously, as has been done, as you said.
Well, fully funding it on an annual basis, but it's still dying.
Exactly.
It's still declining.
Long term.
Yeah.
But there's also tweaks that need to be done to it, policy changes in terms of long term.
Yes. Let me say this real quick. I know that time doesn't allow us to go into great detail,
Please.
but it's important for people to understand. The reason we're talking about this, and despite what people are told, simply funding it is not enough.
Right.
Because by law, the CERS plan, which is also failing, which is also less than 60% funded and declining rapidly, has by law been fully funded every single year. And yet what they're battling is not a function of whether you're funding it to the actuarially required contribution, which again, I'm the only governor to ever meet. That said, that's enough to keep it from bleeding out completely. The reason that it is failing is just straight up demographics.
Right.
When these things were established, you had 20, 25 workers for every retiree, then 15, then 10, then 5, then 3, then 2. There are actually more retirees now in Kentucky than there are workers. It's broken. It has inverted. And because it's inverted, it's impossible. There's no amount of funding. It already consumes 15% of the state budget and is on track to be 20, 25, 30 in the next few years. And it serves a single-digit number of people. So if 90-something% are paying a third of all of their tax money to fund something for a single-digit percentage, eventually that's going to be a non-starter. So we need to save it before we end up with class warfare.
Going into 2019 toward the fall election and then into 2020, What is the timing in your best estimate as to additional legislative changes to
Boy, I wish
reform the system?
If my best guess would really be all that it is, if it was up to me. I mean, and I don't even mind if I had to take 100% of the heat from it. I've taken a fair share of the heat, and yet I have no control over it. I really don't. I don't get to dictate what the legislature does.
Sure.
So it really is 100% dependent on what the legislature themselves does. Will they be willing to call a vote on a bill? Would they be willing to pass that bill? I don't know. I mean, we're a few days left in this legislative session, and I don't see a lot of movement there.
Doesn't appear.
It doesn't
at
appear
this point
to be,
in the current session.
but who knows? I mean, who knows? I mean, crazier things have happened.
One of the big challenges facing Kentucky as well as the entire nation is that of the drug crisis and the opioid crisis, the methamphetamine crisis. What have you been doing as governor in tackling that, and what would you continue doing? Any additional steps as governor?
Boy, there's a lot there as well to unpack. At the highest level, one of the things we did is a first in the nation and most restrictive in the nation. You now cannot, as it relates to opioids, get more than a 3-day initial prescription from a doctor. There's some exceptions that a doctor, if somebody's on hospice care or somebody has cancer or what have you, there are exceptions, of course, that a doctor has the judgment of making. But as a matter of course, for you and I, if we were to go in and get an initial prescription, the CDC has done study after study that show people who are susceptible to becoming addicted to opioids, and some people are more than others. Physiologically, the pharmacodynamic effect of an opioid affects some people differently than others. And for those who become addicted, they become addicted after 5 days or more of continuous use. That's a remarkably short period, and yet people were being sent home with 10 and 15 and 20 and 30-day supplies sometimes of a drug that if they were to become addicted, they would have been addicted 5 days in. So I'm thinking to myself, if we know this to be a fact, and it is, why are we sending home 5 days or more of a prescription? And so we now have in Kentucky the lowest threshold at 3 days. I hope this becomes a standard for the nation. And one of the things we've seen is we've actually seen a leveling off of overdose deaths related to prescription drugs and addiction to prescription drugs in Kentucky. It's still rampant. It's still a huge problem. 85%, you think about this, we have 5% of the world's population in America, and yet we consume 85% of the world's opioids. The rest of the world has pain too. We were talking about that even before we came on air, about the different parts of the world have different ideas about how to deal with certain things, and including pain. And I think sometimes we're so quick to go to certain pharmaceutical drugs, but in this case, ones that are highly addictive for some people. So attending to this, trying to make Narcan more readily available, which is an ability to save a person's life who has overdosed. One of the things we've seen as we've been able to get our arms around opioids is, you mentioned it, methamphetamines has seen an increase relative to where it was just a few years ago. But again, this is manageable. We're also addressing some of the peripheral effects of this that are, some of the various hepatitises that people might get, including hepatitis C. This is something we've seen a prevalence of in certain communities, but we're working with pharmaceutical companies who have abilities to address that, to really use Kentucky in certain communities as a beta site for getting out in front of it, doing preventative work. That's the final thing I'll say on it is this. This ends up being, and many of your viewers I hope will appreciate this, this isn't a function of what's in your medicine cabinet. It's a function of what's in your heart, your mind, and your soul. A lot of these addictions come from people who have lost hope. They're spiritually bankrupt. They're emotionally bankrupt. They feel lost, and they don't have a sense of purpose. And so the void they try to fill that's not fillable with pharmaceuticals ends up leading to addiction. If we can address this, if we can get out in front of this, if we can be preventative, if we can help people to meet them where they are with wraparound services, not just simply criminalizing and incarcerating people, but to truly help people at the front end of addiction or the potential for addiction, I think it'll make all the difference. And we're doing this like nowhere else in the country right now. Time doesn't allow us to go into more programs, but I would encourage people to do it, to look into the things that we're doing on this front, to provide services for people in advance. Final thing I'll say, public service announcements. We've really done a good job of, people getting help with 1-800 dial-in numbers where they can get a live person to help them, where people can go online and find any open bed, not just one in their immediate community, but somewhere in the state that could take them. We've started the Angel Initiative, where you can go into any state police headquarters or trooper post anywhere in the state. You could be strung out, you could be on drugs, you could have somebody with you who might even have paraphernalia and drugs on them. But if they come in and say, I want help, they will not be charged criminally, they will be given help. So we're doing, this is called the Angel Initiative. We're doing it now even in some local communities with local law enforcement. These are the things that are changing the tide, but it will take time.
You and Mrs. Bevin and your administration have been very active in foster care.
Yes.
Tell us about that initiative that you have been working hard on.
This, I'll tell you, my wife, this is a passion of hers, and I'm grateful to her for this. It's a passion of mine as well. The two of us, for some reason, since we were both young, have always had a heart for orphans and kids that were outcast. 4 of our 9 children are adopted. We had 5, intended to adopt 1 more, then learned of a sibling group of 3 others. And once you have 6, it's kind of, 6, 9, what's the difference? So we adopted them. So it's a personal part of our lives, and it is of many people in Kentucky. We want it to be more easily done, less bureaucratic, better for the kids, more expedient, frankly, because kids just need a home. A sad statistic, last year at about this time, it was actually April of last year, America, for the first time ever, crossed a threshold that's sobering. And that is, there are now more children living in America who live in a home without their biological mother and father than children who do, for the first time ever. So it is now abnormal from a numerical standpoint for a child to live in a home with their biological mother and father, which is heartbreaking. And the ripple effect of this, there's 470,000 kids in America in foster care, 10,000 here in Kentucky, 2,500 of them just trying to find a forever family, eligible for adoption, wanting to be adopted. We have more than 6,000 houses of worship in Kentucky. And if we can't find one home out of every 2.5 churches, I don't think we're trying very hard. So this is a passion of ours. We could talk for an hour about this alone. I would just encourage, through Uniting Kentucky, there's an effort we're working with a lot of outside groups, like Focus on the Family, Wendy's Wonderful Kids, the Casey Family Foundation, Orphan Care Alliance, Campbellsville University, and a whole lot of folks nationally and locally to really address this and to come alongside these kids, including those that are young, but also kids, and this is what I appreciate the university working on, is as they age out, these 18-year-olds, where can they go? What path might they be on rather than being thrown simply out to society? The final thing I'll say is this, and this is what I hope anybody watching this takes to heart. A child who ages out at the age of 18, and we have hundreds and hundreds every year in Kentucky who do. They are now adults. The average child who ages out in America at 18, and it's the same here in Kentucky, 54% of them never get a high school graduation diploma or even a GED. A third of them end up being involved with the criminal justice system by the time they're 19, within their first year. For women, it's almost a statistical given that they will be trafficked, that they will be abused, end up in a life of poverty and abuse, as will their children. It's a cycle that we can't afford. We know that the average cost in dollars to society, not to mention the psychological, emotional, spiritual cost, but the dollar cost is over $300,000 per person over their lifetime through incarceration and social services and things for someone who ages out. So we need to do a better job, and Kentucky is leading the way. Literally, there's no state in America more singularly focused on this than Kentucky. And so we're going to be inviting all the other governors and first ladies of the state to Kentucky in 2019 to help look at what we're doing and to try to replicate it in their states also. When
you came into office, Kentucky budget was in major deficit, and we had a series of major cuts over time. Over $1 billion in a few years period of time. Has the budget stabilized and for the most part in terms of revenue and expenditure? What's the forecast over the next 4 years? Do you see the possibility, and I know I'm throwing a lot at you in one question.
No, that's okay.
Do you see new revenues being possible for new programs or increased funding for certain programs?
Couple things real quickly. There is a lot in there. We are required by law to balance our budget. But that has been done in the past by failing to fund the pension, for example. So you can, if you don't put billions into the pension like you're supposed to, then you have billions to spend on other things, including balancing the budget. So it's been a bit of a shell game. We've not played that game, and that's made it tough. If you actually pay your bills, I always say if you walk into a store and you need milk and bread, and you walk out without actually paying, it costs less than if you go to the register and actually pay for the milk and bread. And for years, we've kind of been taking the milk and bread without paying. Now we are paying, and that makes it tough. How can we do this going forward? We need more people living in Kentucky, working and paying taxes. Simple as that. 100% of everything we want from the government, 100% of what the government has the ability to provide, is paid for with taxpayer money. That is the only source, is taxpayer money. You can ratchet it up on the people that are here and cause them to leave, or you can find a broader, lower tax structure that's attractive for people to come. I will say this real quickly. At the end of World War II, which wasn't that long ago, Indiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky had all the same population. In fact, we were slightly bigger than one state, slightly smaller than the other. We now have 4.5 million people. They have 6 to 7 million people. We're the same size. We're all 40,000 square miles, plus or minus. We have more arable land, better seasons, better everything than them in terms of logistics and centrality, seasonality. And yet they have 2 million more people than we do. Could you imagine if we had 2 million more people and if just 30 or 40% of them were paying taxes? 600 or 700 or 800,000 more taxpayers would be an absolute boon. So moving to a consumption-based economy, having more people encouraged to come here, to retire here, to be engaged here, to spend their money here, we have so many blessings here in Kentucky. That's the secret. It won't happen quickly, but it will happen if we stay on this trajectory. That's the battle. This is we're talking to people in this series about those that would aspire to be leaders of this state. Good things come by simple disciplines applied repeatedly, whether it's at a university, whether it's in a church, whether it's in a business, whether it's a state. It's simple disciplines regularly applied. Same for a family, same for an individual. And our state is going to be wrestling with, do we want to continue to move forward or do we want to go backward? That's really going to be the challenge.
Do you see evidence beginning to that we're moving in that direction?
Absolutely. In fact,
under
the
these
fact
policies?
No question. The fact that we have seen the last 2 years, the best 2 years we've ever had of private capital coming from outside being invested in our state. This year is on track to be one of the top 3. I mean, I think the last 3 years will be the 3 best years we've ever had. There are good things happening in Kentucky. But again, it's like seeds. Many of those watching this will have grown up raising crops and or gardens or what have you. And I'm telling you, you appreciate that if you want to eat radishes, you can eat quickly. But who really wants radishes? If you want melons and corn and tomatoes, it takes time. It takes fertilization, cultivation, irrigation, and patience. And so all these things, we are planting seeds in Kentucky. They're starting to germinate. The roots are going deep. They will bear incredible fruit. Have a few things come up, yeah. We've had a few radishes and a little Bibb lettuce, but the real stuff, the good stuff, is yet to come. And I'm excited. We're seeing evidence of it, including in the fact that we have 60% more people looking to our economic development cabinet at this state than we had 2 and 3 years ago.
It's encouraging.
Yeah, it is.
Governor, you would not think you had visited with me if I didn't mention a couple of road projects. And Kentucky obviously has major infrastructure needs, as does the entire nation. Our funding, as you well know much better than I do, is based on a gasoline consumption tax.
Yes.
Essentially, here in this area, and you've been supportive of the continuation of the Heartland Parkway and the bypass around Campbellsville, the Highway 210 upgrade that's in the planning stages at this point is in the 6-year plan.
Yes.
In a general sense, we hope you would continue support of those projects. But in a broader question, what do we need to do to increase funding and to address the infrastructure needs, which are essential to economic development?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's the two things that will separate us from where we are to where we want to be and where we are relative to states around us are education and infrastructure. If you shortchange either one for the long term, you come up short. And so as it relates to infrastructure, you're correct. We get the Federal Highway Trust Fund dollars. That's about half of what we get. The other half comes from this variable excise tax. It's a 9% tax. Roughly, it's capped. It's floored. But it's what we pay at the pump as a percentage of everything we buy. That's the only source we have. No one likes the idea of paying taxes. I mean, the little box on people's taxes that they can check to send in extra money, nobody ever does it. Nobody likes to, but we need the money to be able to pay for infrastructure. So we need a comprehensive plan for the future, not one that gets people elected for the next 2 years, but one that gets people and their children and grandchildren living in the best state in America 50 years from now. And the infrastructure that we're going to need is going to need more than a couple more pennies here and there. We need to think broadly. What are the infrastructure projects? What are not only the heartland parkways of this community, but in other parts of the state? What are the major connectors of economic activity that bring goods and services into and out of our state? How can we open up this gem that is Kentucky to all the people that would live here if we made it easy for them to do so? So these are things we're focused on. There's a bill in the legislature this year that I don't think is going to get the traction that it needs, which would be an increase in road fund dollars. There needs to be an even more comprehensive plan. It is a focus of mine. Last thing I'll say on this is when I was elected, the road plan, you mentioned there's a 2-year road plan and a 6-year road plan.
Yes, sir.
They were oversubscribed by 200%. So in other words, people would tell you, oh, don't worry, it's in the road plan.
In the plan.
But more than 200% of the actual money and ability to do projects were in the road plan. We now have that down to only an 8% overage. And I'm trying to get it down so that what's in the road plan will actually get done. And so people should take comfort at the fact that things like the Heartland Parkway and others are actually in the road plan. They will get done. It's a function of money and resources. So. But we have to just prioritize as well. Last thing I'll say is we have a program called SHIFT. It literally looks at all of the projects around the state. It's not based on politics, not based on how influential your legislator is or who knows the governor. It's based literally on ROI, the return on the investment of that infrastructure dollar for that community and their ability to then generate economic activity that pours back into the coffers that then allows us to have continued expansion and growth.
This basically will be the final question. Your vision for Kentucky and in that education as that other component for economic development.
Boy, my vision is a simple one. It's often been said, without vision, the people will perish, and it's true. It's true for anything, including a state. And my vision is a simple one. If I were to ask you if you wanted to engineer and manufacture something to the highest degree of excellence, you could only do it in a single country in Europe from beginning to end, where would you start? 100% of the time, including the name that probably popped into your head and that of those watching, is Germany. And if Germany is what we think of instinctively, if I were to ask people the very same question about America, which state would you do that in? You might think of 10 or 15 different states. I want Kentucky to be the center of engineering and manufacturing excellence in the United States, so that when people are asked that question about a state in America, we instinctively think of Kentucky like people think of Germany. If we do this, and if we educate people, and that includes traditional post-secondary 2-year, 4-year, but also technical training, certifications, stackable certifications, if we focus on what is best for engineering and manufacturing, how we educate people, how that translates into our infrastructure, we will be the bright gem in the crown of America that we have the capacity to be.
Governor Matt Bevin, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
God bless you out on the road as you travel throughout the world, literally, as well as Kentucky. We wish you the best.
Thank you so much.
This is John Chowning with Governor Matt Bevin, thanking you, our audience, for being with us for Dialogue on Public Issues.